Amagasaki, an industrial city quietly nestled west of Osaka, was never a place I expected to confront such unrelenting darkness. The streets, cloaked in factory soot, and the aging apartment blocks crowding together painted a picture of mundane tranquility. But in late 2011, an urgent call shattered that silence, dragging me, a seasoned investigator from the Hyogo Prefectural Police, into a nightmare beyond imagination. I still remember that day, November 9th, 2011, when a warehouse worker in Amagasaki reported a suspicious metal drum tucked away in a shadowed corner. "It's unnaturally heavy," he said over the phone, his voice trembling. "And there's a smell. Something's wrong." When my team arrived, the biting chill of autumn seemed to deepen under an eerie stillness that gripped the scene. The rusted metal drum, about a meter tall, sat silently amid dusty stacks of goods. We pried it open, and the first thing that hit me was the gray, unyielding concrete, hard as stone. Beneath it lay a woman's body, gaunt, distorted, as if trapped by time and cruelty for far too long. Later, we identified her as Kazuko Oe, 66, an ordinary resident nearby. But the biggest question loomed unanswered. Who did this, and why? Every clue pointed us to an unlikely address: a luxurious penthouse atop an 8-story apartment building in Amagasaki. Its owner was Miyoko Sumida, a 64-year-old woman who, at first glance, seemed an improbable suspect for such a gruesome crime. That apartment, with its lavish furnishings, glittering jewelry, and dim lighting, felt like a world apart from the grim alleys below. Yet behind its opulence, I sensed something frigid, a whisper from the shadows, a stifled cry for help from souls denied peace. I'd investigated countless cases, from petty thefts to brutal murders, but never had the air felt as oppressive as when I stepped into that apartment. It wasn't just the musty smell or the faint light. It was the presence of Miyoko Sumida herself, a woman we'd later call Kijo, demon. She wasn't merely a suspect. She was the linchpin of a web of atrocities that defied comprehension. Standing on the penthouse balcony, gazing at the small storage shed locked from the outside, I knew this was just the beginning of a long descent into the deepest abyss of human depravity. The discovery of Kazuko Oe's body in that concrete-filled drum had shaken me, but it was only the prelude to a descent into darkness I couldn't have foreseen. As an investigator with years behind me at the Hyogo Prefectural Police, I'd seen death in many forms: quick, messy, desperate. But this was different. Oe's remains, curled and broken beneath the concrete, spoke of a slow, deliberate cruelty that gnawed at my resolve. It was a whisper of something larger, and on October 30th, 2012, that whisper became a scream when we pulled a second barrel from the depths of Hinase Harbor in Bizen, Okayama Prefecture. The tip came from a fisherman, his voice tight with unease over the phone. "It's been caught in our nets for days," he said. "Too heavy to be junk. And the smell, it's wrong." Over 100 kilometers from Amagasaki, the harbor sat quiet under a slate-gray sky, its waters a cold mirror reflecting our growing dread. I stood on the dock as the divers descended, their bubbles breaking the surface like faint gasps. The operation was methodical, ropes secured, winches groaning, but the air grew heavier with each passing minute. When the barrel breached the water, its rusted surface slick and dripping, a faint, rancid stench seeped out, cutting through the salty breeze. It was the same size as Oe's tomb, a meter high, and its weight told me we weren't pulling up trash. We moved it to shore, the clank of metal on concrete echoing across the empty harbor. My team gathered close, faces taut, as I gave the nod to break it open. The chisel bit into the concrete, each strike a jarring pulse in the silence, until the slab cracked apart. Inside lay Jiro Hashimoto, 54, his body a grotesque relic of torment. His skin clung to bones like parchment, bruises mottling his arms and chest, eyes sunken in a final hollow stare. He'd been starved, beaten, left to wither. Death hadn't come fast. Forensics later pinned his demise to the summer of 2011, months before OA, but the how and why gnawed at me as I stood there, the wind whipping my coat. Hashimoto wasn't a random victim. A distant relative of Miyoko Sumida, he'd been part of her world, a world we were only beginning to unravel. The trail snapped back to that penthouse in Amagasaki, where the balcony shed loomed in my mind like a black hole. Witnesses, pale and hesitant, spoke in fragments under interrogation. They said he'd fled to Tokyo in 2009, seeking escape, only to be hunted down and dragged back by Sumida's enforcers. She wouldn't let him go, one muttered, hands trembling. He was locked in that shed, punched, kicked, left there for days. The shed, barely a meter wide, was a coffin of wood and despair, its lock a silent warden. They'd watched him waste away, then hauled his corpse to Bizen under cover of night, sinking it into the sea as if erasing a mistake. I lingered at the harbor long after the body was bagged, staring at the water's surface as it settled. The concrete wasn't just concealment. It was a ritual, a mark of someone who savored domination. Hashimoto's relatives, some already in custody, crumbled under pressure, their confessions painting a picture of Miyoko's iron rule. She told us he was a burden, one said, voice flat. She made us do it. The penthouse, with its mirrored halls and plush furniture, mocked the brutality it hid. Standing there, cataloging the evidence, I felt the case shift beneath my feet. This wasn't one murder. It was a system. How many more barrels waited out there, submerged in silence? And what kind of monster thrived at the heart of it all? The discovery of Kazuko Oe and Jiro Hashimoto's bodies had cracked open a door. But by October 2012, that door was blown wide, revealing a sprawling abyss of depravity centered on Miyoko Sumida. The press latched onto the name the Piranha Family, a grimly apt label for a clan that turned on itself with feral precision. As lead investigator, I'd seen cases unravel before, but this was different. A dynasty of death stretching from 2003 to 2011, woven from blood, fear, and an insatiable greed. Every record we sifted, every trembling relative we questioned, every property we searched pulled us deeper into Sumida's web, where the living became prey and the dead were silenced with chilling efficiency. The next revelation hit on October 14, 2012, in a weather-beaten house in Amagasaki, owned by the 88-year-old grandmother of Sumida's daughter-in-law, Rui. It had sat abandoned for years, its peeling walls and sagging roof blending into the city's decay. A tip from a nervous neighbor, "No one's been there, but I heard things," sent us digging. We tore up the tatami mats in a 6-mat room, the air thick with dust and anticipation. Then came the smell, a sour, rotting stench that clawed at my throat. Beneath the floorboards, a shallow pit held 3 bodies, their forms half mummified, skin stretched tight over brittle bones. DNA confirmed their identities. Mitsue Ando, 71, partner of Sumida's elder brother. Mariko Nakashima, 29, Rui's older sister. And Takashi Tanimoto, 68, an uncle. Bruises marred their skulls and legs, ribs jutting like silent accusations. They hadn't died quickly. Starvation and dehydration had leached their lives away, day by agonizing day. These weren't strangers plucked from the streets. Each was bound to Sumida by blood or familiarity. lured into her penthouse like moths to a flame. Interrogations peeled back the horror. Relatives, pale and hollow-eyed, spoke of the balcony shed, that cramped, locked box where victims were caged. She'd give them scraps, one whispered, voice cracking. Noodles, sometimes nothing. They'd beg, but she'd just watch. Nakashima's fate was a nightmare unto itself. In 2003, Sumida stormed her family's home in Takamatsu, enraged over a refusal to house her cousin Masanori. She occupied the house for months, her violence breaking them apart. Mariko's mother withered to skin and bone, dying in despair. Her father, bled dry for $118 million, was left a shell. Sumida took Mariko and Tanimoto to Amagasaki, where they endured years of torment before vanishing around 2008. Their bodies, buried under that floor, were her final erasure. The family structure was a grotesque parody of loyalty. Miyoko, the matriarch, wielded absolute power, her sister-in-law Mieko managing the profits, her cousin Masanori breaking bones, her son Yutaro and daughter-in-law Rui executing her will. They'd beaten Hashimoto bloody, locked him in the shed until he starved, his pleas muffled by the wooden fence. Oe, a neighbor drawn too close, met the same fate. Confined, beaten, killed by her own daughters under Sumida's coercion. The method never wavered. Isolate, brutalize, dispose. Bodies vanished into concrete drums, beneath floors, into the sea, a systematic obliteration of evidence and humanity. Standing in that house, the pit gaping like a wound, I traced the threads. Sumida preyed on trust, kin who leaned on her, acquaintances who owed her, anyone who strayed into her grasp. The penthouse, with its mirrored halls and glittering jewels, was no longer a home. It was a slaughterhouse, the balcony its killing floor. Luxury mocked the suffering it hid. Every gem a life extinguished, every plush chair a throne over graves. Each discovery tightened the net, but dread gnawed at me. 4 others remained unaccounted for. Hashimoto's mother, the elderly grandmother, 2 more tied to that cursed condo. Were they rotting in some undiscovered tomb, their screams swallowed by Sumida's silence? I left that house under a heavy sky, the weight of the missing pressing down, knowing we'd only begun to plumb the depths of her terror. By November 2012, the investigation had spiraled into a grotesque tapestry of death, with Miyoko Sumida at its center. 5 bodies confirmed: Kazuko Oe, Jiro Hashimoto, Mitsue Ando, Mariko Nakashima, Takashi Tanimoto, and 4 others missing, their fates a looming question mark. As an investigator, I'd chased motives before: desperation, rage, revenge. But Sumida's drove a stake through every assumption I'd held. This wasn't petty crime escalated. It was a harvest, a meticulous reaping of lives for profit and dominion. Her penthouse, dripping with ostentatious wealth, wasn't a sanctuary. It was a vault, each luxury item a tally of the souls she'd claimed. The first thread of her scheme unraveled with her husband, Hisayoshi Sumida. July 1st, 2005, Cape Manza, Okinawa. A group of 9 posed for a photo on a cliff's edge, the ocean roaring 30 meters below. Hisayoshi, 51, stood at the back, then fell. An accident, the report said. But the $190 million in insurance payouts and a cleared mortgage raised flags. I tracked down a witness from that day, a friend of Mieko's, her voice trembling over coffee in a dim Osaka cafe. "He didn't trip," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Miyoko nudged him, barely a push but deliberate. We were too scared to speak. Another claimed she'd hissed, Jump, or I'll make you, moments before. Murder or coerced suicide, the outcome was identical. A fortune landed in her lap, the cornerstone of her empire. I pored over that photo late at night, her faint smirk a dagger against the serene backdrop. The pattern repeated. Kazuko Oe, a neighbor, had loaned Sumida money. Small sums at first, then larger, until she vanished into a drum. Jiro Hashimoto, tied to family assets, lingered too long in her orbit. Mitsue Ando, guarantor for the penthouse's Ys 29.8 million loan, died conveniently after Hisayoshi's windfall paid it off. In Takamatsu, Sumida extorted Ys $18 million from Nakashima and Tanemoto's family, occupying their home in 2003, breaking them with violence until they followed her to Amagasaki and death. Each victim left something behind: cash, property, pensions. She'd flaunt the spoils, jewelry worth $200 million, a mirrored entrance, luxury furniture, bragging to neighbors while their loved ones rotted in concrete or under floorboards. "It's mine now," she'd say, voice devoid of warmth, as if ownership absolved the blood on her hands. Greed explained the profits, but power explained the process. Sumida didn't just kill, she orchestrated. The balcony shed wasn't a whim. It was her guillotine, a slow, deliberate tool of control. Relatives described her reign in hushed tones. Oe's daughters, forced to beat their mother to death under threat. Rui, molded into a loyal pawn, turning on her sister Mariko. Yutaro and Masanori, her fists when words weren't enough. "Disobey, and she'd scream until you broke," one said, eyes vacant. Then the shed. No food, no water, just darkness. I stood inside it once, the air stale and suffocating, imagining their final days. It wasn't punishment. It was a lesson in submission, etched into every bruise and hollowed frame we uncovered. Her interrogation cemented it. November 7th, 2012, a sterile room. She sat across from me, hands folded, eyes like ice. "It's all on me," she said, flat and unyielding, no flicker of guilt. I pressed, "Why the cruelty, the starvation?" But she only stared, a mind that weighed lives like yen. Bank records piled up, insurance claims, loan repayments, stolen pensions, yet the human toll lingered heavier. In that penthouse, surrounded by her trophies, I saw a woman who didn't just want wealth. She wanted to own people, to crush them until they were husks. How many more had she tallied? Their names erased from her ledger, waiting in unmarked graves. By December 2012, the Piranha family's reign was crumbling, but the horror peaked before it fell. 5 bodies: Kazuko Oe, Jiro Hashimoto, Mitsue Ando, Mariko Nakashima, Takashi Tanemoto, lay catalogued in our morgue, their silent testimony damning Miyoko Sumida. 4 others remained shadows, lost to her labyrinth of death. As lead investigator, I'd chased her trail through concrete drums and buried pits, but closing the net around her felt less like victory and more like staring into an abyss that stared back. Her arrest on December 5th, 2011 for Oe's murder was just the beginning. By November 7th, 2012, we'd hauled in 7 others: her sister-in-law Mieko, cousin Masanori, son Yutaro, daughter-in-law Rui, and more, all shackled to her will. The penthouse raid was a descent into madness. November 7th, 2012. We breached the 8th floor sanctum, its mirrored halls reflecting our flashlight beams like fractured ghosts. The air hung thick with stale luxury, perfume clashing with decay. The balcony shed, that coffin of despair, stood ajar, its wooden walls stained with desperation. Inside, we found shackles, a rusted spoon, a frayed blanket, relics of the damned. Downstairs, the living room gleamed with opulence. Why was $200 million in jewelry glinted in a glass case, mocking the lives it cost? Sumida sat calmly as we cuffed her gray hair neat, her eyes unblinking. "I'm to blame for everything," she said, voice steady, a confession that chilled more than it clarified. No remorse, no fear, just a void where a soul should have been. Interrogations broke her pawns. Miyoko sobbed, detailing the wise $90 million from Hisayoshi's fall, her hands stained with his insurance blood. Masanori, hulking and hollow, admitted encasing Hashimoto in concrete, his fists still clenched as if mid-strike. Rui, young and brittle, recounted locking her sister Mariko in the shed, tears falling as she whispered, "She made me." Yutaro stared blankly, parroting, "Mother said it was right." Their fear of her was palpable, a cult-like dread forged over years. She'd ruled them with screams and starvation, turning family into executioners. "Disobey, and you're next," one stammered, eyes darting to the shed's shadow on the wall. The climax came swiftly and darkly. December 12, 2012, a week after new charges for Hashimoto's murder. Sumida was found dead in her cell. Suicide watch hadn't stopped her. At 6 a.m., she'd been dozing. By 6:10, she'd choked herself, hands clawing her own throat. A final act of control. I arrived as they wheeled her out. Her face pale, lips twisted in a faint smirk. The guards were shaken. How had she slipped through? She'd hinted at it days before, telling an officer, "I want to die. How can I do it?" Her lawyer, Hajime Takagi, saw her last on December 11th. "She said living was meaningless," he told me, voice low. She bowed, thanked me, then went silent. Was it escape from justice or a last defiance? The cell's cold walls offered no answers. Standing over her body, I felt no triumph. The Piranha family was gutted, 6 in custody, their matriarch gone, but the cost was staggering. Her death closed a chapter, yet left questions dangling like loose threads. Where were the missing 4? What drove her to such depths? The penthouse, now a sealed crime scene, loomed in my mind, its silence louder than ever. Sumida had taken her secrets to the grave, leaving us to sift through the wreckage of a decade-long nightmare. The horror hadn't ended. It had shifted, a weight we'd carry as we hunted the ghosts she'd buried. Miyoko Sumida's death on December 12, 2012, didn't close the case. It cast a long shadow over Amagasaki and beyond. As the lead investigator, I stood at the edge of her unraveling empire. 5 bodies accounted for, 4 still lost to her silence. The Piranha family, 6 members in custody, their matriarch a corpse, left a trail of devastation that defied comprehension. The penthouse, sealed and silent, became a monument to her atrocities, its mirrored halls reflecting nothing but the void she'd carved. But as the gavel fell and the headlines faded, the deeper questions lingered, gnawing at me late into the night. What bred this horror, and what could we learn from its ashes? The numbers told a chilling story. Japan's elderly crime wave, spotlighted in a 2012 white paper, showed 48,737 people over 65 investigated that year. 16% of all cases, a 6-fold rise in 2 decades. Homicides by the old ticked up while the national rate dropped, a paradox tied to shrinking pensions, fractured families, and a growing chasm between rich and poor. Sumida, 64, embodied this shift, but her crimes transcended statistics. She wasn't a desperate shoplifter or a homeless soul seeking prison's warmth. She was a predator, cloaked in grandmotherly guise, turning isolation into a weapon. Her penthouse, a fortress of wealth, mocked the elderly struggle. Her victims, kin and neighbor alike, bore the cost of her greed. The social rot ran deep. Once, Japan's families were tight-knit, grandparents cradled by their children's care. Now, many lived alone, cut off, vulnerable, just as Sumida's prey had been. She exploited trust, twisting familial bonds into chains. Oe's daughters beating their mother, Rui condemning her sister. These weren't just crimes. They were betrayals of the human thread. Beyond Amagasaki, her case echoed a warning. Isolation breeds monsters, and greed festers where community frays. The government's YSO $8.3 billion for elderly prison wards was a bandage, not a cure. The real fix lay in mending what had broken. For me, the lessons were personal. I'd walked through that penthouse, smelled the shed's despair, met Sumida's icy stare. Justice had claimed her, but not the missing. Hashimoto's mother, the grandmother, two others still voiceless. Their absence haunted me, a reminder that evil doesn't always yield its secrets. To the living, I say this: watch your neighbors, hold your families close, question the silences. To the victims, I offer no pity, only respect. Your suffering lit the path to truth. Sumida's darkness taught us vigilance. Let it not be in vain.